welcome to a very special edition of the Alex Salmond Show. This week the world remembered the Holocaust in a series of events internationally. We therefore examine how best to combine memorial and education in our collective desire never to let this madness happen again. Our generation will be the last to be privileged to hear direct from Holocaust survivors. And so I'll be talking to Freddie Nola. We'll also be speaking about the plans for a new memorial here in Victoria Tower Gardens, adjacent to the Palace of Westminster. We'll be learning from author Anne Seba about what was necessary to survive in Nazi-occupied France. And finally from Debbie Arnold, the daughter of a woman saved from the Holocaust by the kindertransport programme. But first, let's turn to your tweets, your messages and your emails. And so over to Tasmina in the studio.
Thank you, Alex. Our first tweet is from James McCarthy, who says, "Another great show. Good balance, not a minute wasted. Any plans for some on-location recording? The kettle's always on here in the bothy." Thank you very much, James, for the kind invitation. We will actually be out and about in the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure we'll be headed in your direction, though. Another tweet in from Susan Kemp, who says, "Love the Alex Salmond Show. The guests are always made to feel so welcome and allowed to answer undisturbed." I'm glad you enjoy our interview style, Susan. We certainly aim to give people a chance to have their voices heard. Then in relation to last week's show, which is, of course, partly a tribute to Rabbie Burns and around Brexit also, Val Brown says, "Great show, Alex," says Val. "A fond kiss always brings a tear." Bob says, "Loved A fond kiss, A Man's a Man by Ryan Joseph Burns. It was a beautiful song and beautifully presented by Ryan Joseph Burns. I hope you all get the opportunity to listen to it." Terry says, "Alex Salmond, brilliant, a great show. Robbie Burns, a nationalist and internationalist, just like you, Alex, and your show." And finally, a tweet from Iced Cooley, who says, "Alex, what do you think Burns would make of today's Brexit shambles?" Well, that's a great question. Who knows the answer to it? I suppose as an internationalist, he'd be most concerned that we appear to be looking inwards rather than outwards. He was a man that thought of the world at large and how we should play a major part in it.
Now I'm delighted to be joined by the Chief Rabbi, Ephraim Marvis. Chief Rabbi, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much, Alex. Lovely to be here.
How important, in your opinion, is it, the location of the new memorial? How important is it to the Jewish community, to survivors, and indeed the descendants of survivors?
The concept is very important, and the location is great. The location is a statement. Right next to the Houses of Parliament, what it means is that the British nation cares about what happened during the Second World War. Anti-Semitism is not only a Jewish problem, anti-Semitism is a threat to our entire society. So the fact that the British nation are investing in this initiative is of enormous significance, and most of all to our Holocaust survivors, because they are really deeply worried. What's going to happen beyond their own lifetime? We need to let them know that we're going to carry their torch for them. We will guarantee that we will remember the Holocaust, and more importantly, we'll remember the lessons of the Holocaust.
And speaking of lessons, how important is the educational aspect of the Memorial and Learning Centre?
I think that's the essence of the entire initiative, because we are remembering the past for the sake of the present and the future. Isn't it tragic, Alex, that so many years after the Second World War, there have been genocides in Bosnia, in Cambodia, in Darfur, in Rwanda? The world hasn't yet learned those lessons, so we do need to educate. And we will take advantage of virtual images, of online learning. This will be a hub, it will be an educational center, and it will act in tandem with Imperial War Museum and other outstanding centers through which we remember and memorialize the Holocaust.
Chief Rabbi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
In around 3 years' time, if things go according to plan, they'll take shape near this spot, the Holocaust Memorial for the UK, which will take its place among the great memorials to the Holocaust around the world. But this will be more than just a memorial. It'll also be a learning and research centre, so that the next generation can learn the lessons of the appalling events of more than 70 years ago. Because one of the key aspects of the work of the Holocaust Memorial Commission, of which I'm a board member, has been the gathering of testimony from survivors of the Holocaust. Our generation will be the last who can speak firsthand to these remarkable people. One such man living quietly in North London is Freddie Nola. I spoke to him earlier this week. Thank you for allowing this interview. You've had a fascinating life, documented in your book, Living with the Enemy. You started off very happily in Vienna with your family, where you were a musician. Tell us a bit about that.
I played the cello. In fact, all the parents made sure that all three brothers, we had to learn an instrument. My oldest brother, the piano, my middle brother, violin, and naturally I had to play the cello because they wanted to have a trio. And we became a quite well-known young trio of the brother Nolas, where we played the charity functions.
These would be a happy time.
Friday night, or we played always the trio of the brothers, played at home after Shabbat dinner, and it was very nice. It was a very nice atmosphere.
Your parents would realise that the storm clouds were gathering and anti-Jewish legislation was starting to be passed, and not just in Germany, but in Austria too. So you went to Belgium before the war started.
I was the last one to leave after my one brother went to America, the other one to England, and my parents had some friends in Belgium, in Brussels. And they phoned up their friends, can I send the youngest boy, Freddie Nola, over to you? And naturally they said, yeah, by all means send him over and we'll take care of him.
But then, of course, the Germans invaded Belgium.
The Germans invaded Belgium.
So, Freddie, when you were in Austria, they invaded Austria. When you were in Belgium, they invaded Belgium. Did you ever get the impression they were after you in particular?
When the Germans invaded Belgium, I ran away to France because I read in naughty books, actually, about Paris, the Moulin Rouge with the half-naked dancers on the stage, and, naughty books telling all about the joy of young people, of men and women in Paris.
In Paris, you joined the resistance.
Not as yet. I was working on Place Pigalle, actually, Montmartre, where I contacted German soldiers on Place Pigalle because there were so many German soldiers there. And we took them to brothels and to cabarets, and they paid us a commission for bringing the German soldiers into these naughty places. And that's how we made it. I made a very good living, actually, doing this here. Naturally, I had false papers. For 100 francs, I bought myself some false papers, and I changed my name to Robert Metzner, born in Alsace-Lorraine.
So that worked for a while. They didn't identify who you really were.
That's right.
But then you were discovered.
I met a girl, I fell in love with her. Jacqueline was her name. And I told her that I was in the resistance. But one day when we had fight between each other, she went to the Germans and told them that Freddie Nola, that Robert Metzner is not from Alsace-Lorraine, but he's working for the resistance.
You point out that the cinemas were showing anti-Semitic films, and the atmosphere in Paris and then the Vichy government started to collaborate with the Germans in their anti-Jewish policy.
Exactly.
And of course, then you had your fight with your girlfriend. You were exposed as to who you really were. You arrived in 1945 in Gliwice camp in Poland.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then taken to Mittenbau-Dora concentration camp near Nordhausen.
Dora.
And then, of course, the Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz, and you were taken to Bergen-Belsen.
Bergen-Belsen, where we were liberated by the British Army.
Now, in many ways, it's said by survivors and those who experienced these dreadful conditions that Belsen was the worst camp of all.
Yeah, because no food was given to us, and people just died like flies. It was the ground of Bergen-Belsen was full of dead people, who died of hunger. And I remember digging into the ground just to find some roots to eat, just anything to keep alive. And it was just unbelievable, something that I will never forget.
And when you were in Belsen, how much information did you have about the hopes that the Allied forces, in this case the British forces, were approaching the camp for liberation? Did you know, did you have knowledge that they were coming, or did you not know anything?
Nobody knew anything. And suddenly one day somebody came to me and said, look, there seem to be other troops at the entrance of the camp. And I went there and I saw it was the British Army who liberated Bergen-Belsen. And right away, it was such joy for us. And we were, first thing, they were giving us some food, anything to eat, because they saw all the dead people.
Yes.
And they got the German guards there to get them to take the dead bodies and dig graves, and they had to bury the dead bodies in the ground.
What is the motivation that drives you to tell this story about the appalling conditions in Belsen, about the privation, about the people dying like flies, as you put it? What drives you to say what happened?
I do not want the world ever to forget what has happened in the Second World War. Especially now we know 6 million innocent Jewish people were murdered because they were Jews, and innocent people were murdered by the Nazis. And I don't want the world ever to forget what has happened. And this is the reason why I still talk today to children, so that this will never ever to be forgotten.
If the human spirit determines to survive and looks forward, you think that's the key?
That's the key, absolutely.
To why you're sitting here today?
Yeah, absolutely. I never gave up. This is my optimism. Everything will be all right. I will get over it. And this is actually, I'm sure this is why I am keeping alive, and this is why I'm a very happy man now at 96, very happy with my wife and very happy with my family. It's wonderful.
Freddie, thank you so much for being interviewed.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Anne Seba is an award-winning novelist, historian and journalist whose recent novel, Les Parisiens, focuses on the lives of women in Nazi-occupied Paris. Her research has led her to speak to a number of Holocaust survivors from that time. Anne Seba, journalist, author and historian, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you for inviting me.
We'd like to speak to you today about the book Les Parisiens, which you wrote after, I believe, 5 years of research. I mentioned some of the stories, and if you can give us an idea of how you came across all of these wonderful women.
Don't forget, we've grown up in a time of peace and plenty. We've never known fear, but these women really experienced fear. So I think that's one of the main things. I can't imagine that I'd ever be as courageous. Of course, we hope we would be. But suppose we take a woman like Arlette Testila.
Indeed, still alive and living in Paris.
Still alive today, who I think of often because she was only a child. She and her sister Madeleine were looked after by their mother because the father had already been taken prisoner. They were a Jewish family in the heart of Paris. And I think it needs to be said that many of these Jewish families felt as if they were French. They were proud to be Jewish, but they really identified as French. They loved France. You know, it was the country of Zola, of Rousseau. Mm-hmm. So Arlette, who's now in her late 80s and a wonderfully elegant Parisienne, told me her story, how they were rounded up in July 1942, one of these big roundups that the Vichy government undertook for the Germans, called the Rafle du Veldiv. Rafle means roundup, and Veldiv because they were taken to a sports stadium, which was highly unsuitable for a matter of hours, let alone days, and people were held there for 5 days in boiling heat. And Arlette, who told me what it was like to be there and how they were taken by train then to another camp, and most people were shipped on to one of the concentration camps, mostly Auschwitz, where they were killed. Arlette and her sister and her mother, by a series of really clever ruses, persuaded the Germans to let them come back into Paris. They said they'd hidden furs, and the Germans really needed furs for Siberia, and machines to turn furs into coats that were really important for the German army. So they came back into Paris, and then they
constantly thinking, of course, of ways to survive.
Thinking. That's what's so amazing, when your life is hanging by a thread.
Even in that circumstance.
Yes. And they were persuaded by their mother to jump off a moving train, to lie between the wooden sleepers, and then the mother came back and collected them. Then they walked into Paris. The mother managed to hide them with people, paying out of scraps of embroidery that she'd hidden, paid for them to survive the war. And then after the war, when the mother discovered, because what all the Parisians had to do, they went to the Hôtel Lutetia, where there were great lists put up of people who were coming back and whether they'd survived or not. And after a while, she realized that her husband, who was her childhood sweetheart, obviously wasn't coming back. At that point, the mother commits suicide. And these two children are made orphans of state. And Arlette today is so positive and smiling and elegant. And she goes into schools and she tells these stories because she believes, like me, that it's really important to tell these stories of survival, to tell these stories of refugees, because, as you rightly say, we're still suffering. The world is still turned upside down with refugees being displaced, and where do they go, and who's looking out for them, and how can we help them? There's no difference, really.
If I may, Anne, and I hope you do continue to write, and we can continue to enjoy the tremendous insight you have with survivors and members of their family. This, though, must have affected you personally when speaking to people. I'm wondering on the impact of yourself as a writer, a journalist, and a historian, and meeting people with so many great stories.
That's such an interesting question. How can it not? And, you know, you're constantly thinking partly of your responsibility to tell these stories accurately, not to be judgmental, to understand the courage of sometimes these teenagers. One woman I met on the death march, who had completed the death march with her mother, but when she was a teenager, she used to deliver pamphlets in Paris, and she told me how she used to walk from one metro station to another if she thought the Gestapo were waiting for her. How on earth could I imagine that I would have found that courage? So it certainly made me feel that one has to be a bit more courageous in life. But also, yes, there were many nights when I lay awake and I thought, you know, I don't want to exploit these stories, but on the other hand, I think it is very important that they're told. So it does have that effect on you, you're right.
Well, Anne Seba, thank you very much indeed for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you for talking to me.
A key aspect of remembrance is to celebrate the achievement of refugees and survivors and remind ourselves of how poorer this world would be if they had not been saved. With me is Debbie Arnold, whose mother Mary came to London on the very last train as part of the kindertransport programme. Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, Debbie.
Hi, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Now, your mother told you a great deal about what she remembers, so tell me exactly, how old was she? What did she remember about the getting on the train? What was the last time she saw your grandparents?
Well, she remembers sitting on her papa's knee and him saying to her, if you hear yes and no, you're in England. So she knew those words in English. Then she said that she remembered going to the station and she was really excited to go and see a train in a station. And she was with Mama and Papa.
And this was from Vienna?
This was from Vienna. She was holding her mother and father's hand, and her auntie was there as well, and she was skipping towards the train. Loads of people at the station. Then she turned around and her mother had gone, her father had gone, and she was holding hands with her auntie. And she was looking around for Mama and Papa, bearing in mind she was this high. And then the next thing she knew, she was pushed on the train and turned around and her auntie was gone. And then she started to get frightened and started to cry, and she couldn't see over to the window. So, you know, the train was here and my mother couldn't see out of the window, so she just started to cry.
Did she begin to understand what had happened, why it had happened?
Well, I think probably years later, but she was picked up at Harwich, and then she went to a family in London. And she...
And this is not a Jewish family?
No. I mean, a lot of the Jewish families wouldn't take the children, and I mean, that's quite common knowledge. And I don't know if it was their fear about, you know, what would happen to them, but a lot of them went to Gentile families. And so my mother didn't even know she was Jewish until she was 11 anyway.
When did she determine to sort of reclaim her Jewish heritage?
Well, she didn't really know anything about it until she left. She was brought up into this family, and she was a companion for their daughter. And my mum came with some beautiful boots as a child, and beautiful clothes from Vienna, and all of these clothes were given to this other child. And so she lay there in this little bed, and she used to say that she used to lie on the end of her bed. Oh my God, this is going to make me cry. I'm sorry. She used to lie on the end of her bed and wait for Mummy to come and get her.
You're thinking about it. It shows that the impact of these events succeeds down the generations.
Oh, sure, because it makes you so, you know, aware of your mortality for a start, of how brave my grandparents were, but this tiny little girl who had no one. And so when I was born, she looked after me, she loved me so much, but she really didn't know how to be a mum herself. So when at 11 years old, she went to the Beacon in Tunbridge Wells, which is where all the children went, and I think that would probably be just after the war had finished, or about when the war was finishing. She was sent to the Beacon in Tunbridge Wells, and then she met all the other children who'd been on the kindertransport, children that had came over, and they were all together in this place in Tunbridge Wells. And that's when my mum started to realise who she was, and that she was Jewish.
Their stories.
Yes, and then she got the telegram, because then they were all given telegrams about saying what had happened to their parents. And she said all the other kids were getting telegrams: sister alive, brother alive, Mary Grimminger, parents exterminated. That was it. So she just thought, well, that's it.
And that's how the news was broken, just in the form of
a telegram, parents exterminated. That was the end.
So your mum, after thinking she was alone in the world, all of a sudden a brother pops up. Did she tell you how she felt that when she was introduced to a close relative?
Well, Uncle Joseph found her, and the reason that he found her was that her father was in Auschwitz, and he found his father in Auschwitz. And he said to his father said to his son, "You have a sister in England, and you have to go and find her." So Joseph escaped from Auschwitz, which is very rare, not many people did. And he came to find his sister in England, and he found her. I remember when I met Uncle Joseph, and the first thing my mother showed me was the number on his arm.
From Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And he also was able to give your mum more information about the family.
Yes, saying that his father was a comedian, that he was a big star in the Yiddish theatre.
So at a relatively young age, she became Miss, I think 18, she became Miss Great Britain. And then she had you at, what, 20?
Well, she married my dad. My dad was a very big star then. And she married him. She met him in a Jewish dance. And he found, because he always wanted to adopt one of the children from the kindertransport. So when he found her, he brought her home to his house in Sunderland and said, "Look, I found my refugee." So he got her from the very, beginning, if you like. So he kidnapped her and took her to Sunderland, which it really was a kidnap. But she did very well. And then he became ill. And because he was very, very successful. He topped the Palladium 3 times in 3 months, and his career was just taking off.
So everything took a fantastic turn in her life for the better, and then tragedy struck.
Yeah, then he had a brain tumour, and then my mum had to learn how to survive without him. And of course, a friend of hers had just opened a nightclub in Newcastle, and he asked her if he could ring up somebody to book him, and my mum then became an agent.
Do you think knowing the background of your family affected you? Did it make you more determined, or were there, emotional drawbacks to it?
Well, I think your values are very different when you know what you've come from, because you are, the child of a refugee. So therefore, things that are transient don't mean that much. I mean, my mother always used to say, and remember the thing about fame as well, because my father was very famous, and she used to say to me, "And you can forget about fame, darling, because you can't take it to bed with you, and it doesn't love you at night, and it doesn't pay the bills." So it's made us all very, very level-headed.
When you see the stories of other refugee families and their descendants and the success they've achieved in a range of human endeavour, do you have a feeling of solidarity? Is there a feeling of justification?
Yes, I do. I feel that with any people that have had family in the kindertransport, or people that have lost people in the Holocaust, I feel hugely connected to them. Because I think that the thing is now everything's become very diluted, and we're in a very sort of cosmopolitan society, so there's mixes of everything. But I feel what we went through, I still feel still feel it's part of me. It's never left me. I don't know if my children feel the same, but it's definitely part of me.
What message do you think it sends to societies which accept refugees in terms of the potential for good, which often comes out of evil?
Yes, I mean, I think people should look after refugees. I really do. I understand that, you know, that there is a possibility that there's a huge influx of people. But I think when there's a war and we can help people, why wouldn't you?
Listening to your life story and your mum's story in particular, I mean, your family is living testimony, firstly, to what actually happened to people, to families. That's really important that that story is told.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, we're here. What happened to our family? You know, there are people today that said the Holocaust didn't exist. Well, it did. Otherwise, there are millions of people that have been wiped out. We don't know where they are. Something definitely happened, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge it enormously. And our children should know it's a very important part of history.
And those of us who have survived.
Yes.
Families who have survived. You who have survived through your mother.
Yes.
Have made a huge contribution to their adopted country.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, my mother just loved, you know, she was proud to be British. She was so proud to be British. And I think we've helped so many people in this country, and we should carry on doing that. It's really important.
Debbie Arnold, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It is now over 70 years since the full horror of the extermination camps was revealed. And as the voices of the last first-hand testimony of survivors are stilled, then the priority must be to present the next generation with the opportunity to remember the reality of the Holocaust. Memorial Day is part of that process, as are the monuments and centres, large and small, national and community-led. But none of these will really matter unless the educational programme is effective in presenting an experience which is etched into the life experience of every school child. Then and only then can we be assured that the horror of the previous generation will not be visited on those who follow.